Hello and welcome to the workshop for a little brief show and tell, and then I promise we'll head out to the range, and we'll do that with this lovely Swedish 1851 naval Kammerlader rifle. Now, if you Google Kammerlader, you will most probably come across the Norwegian model of this rifle, and that's normal because its history pretty much starts there. We have a decree of 1837 by the King of Norway, who decides that it's time to have a new armament system for all the armed forces. So in those days that would have been the army, artillery, the cavalry, and of course the navy. And took a pretty brave step to say that this would have to be a breech-loading firearm. Now, this was meant in the sense of a percussion firearm. The only exception to the rule at that time would have been the Prussians, who around that time were also just starting out with designing the Dreiser. So we can forget those. The rest of the world was pottering along and getting to grips with the percussion system. And at the time, there were a couple of breech loaders that had already been around and used in service. Probably the most notable one right at the start was the Ferguson Rifle. Now that was proved to work, and even reproductions nowadays show that it wasn't too prone to fouling. You have to take things in comparison to the period. But however, it's quite tricky to make, and it requires a good bit of training for it to be used effectively. So it's probably too expensive and too fragile for really a sort of global issue firearm. The other one, which had a little broader usage, was the American Hall rifle, so from the early 1820s, and that proved to work very well. Again, it was used more as a specialist firearm, riflemen and cavalry, but that was so popular it even transitioned into the percussion era, and that was very good. It worked well. However, there was a severe lack of breech sealing. Here, thank you very much to John Klear, one of our patrons, who has shown us a little clip here of how it works. But basically, between the mobile chamber and the barrel, there's nothing. So you've got a mass of gas escape, and it's a trade-off. One, the manufacturing tolerances weren't what they are today, and two, you need a bit of tolerance. Otherwise it will seize up through black powder fouling. So that's what it was, and that particular part of the design never evolved. It was obviously sufficient for what they were wanting to do. For the Norwegians, not quite good enough. And there are actually two further systems a little closer to home. In France, however, they're more obscure for different reasons. The first is a wall gun, the 1831 pattern. It was also an 1828 pattern, which was in flintlock, but the system is the same. And it has a chamber which looks suspiciously like the Kammerlader chamber, with the same notion of having a mouth bit that enters into the barrel. But it's a completely manual system, as you can see here in the pics. You have to tilt the chamber up yourself, and it's locked in place by an articulated wedge. There's no evidence that this system influenced the Norwegians in any way. All guns were made in very small numbers anyway, and were already going out of fashion, if they ever were. And the second one is the Horbere Rifle, which was a prototype trialled in 1833 in France. That uses a Pauli type cartridge, so it has a cartridge body and a fulminate tube out the back. And you have, coincidentally, an Underhammer system that pops up, crushes the pellet, and fires the cartridge. However, that was pretty delicate. The sealing was no good. It was suffering from the consequences of being a first-gen breech loader. However, there was something a bit closer to home which did grab their interest, and that was across the water in neighbouring Denmark, which there was a gunsmith called, if I can remember him, Nikolai Johann Lubnitz. And he had come up also in around 1833 with an interesting breech system which deals with, to a sufficient degree, this breech sealing problem. Now here is some footage of a Lubnitz cavalry pistol, and many thanks to Dr. Stephen Wardlaw of ctmuzzleloaders.com for allowing me to use this footage. And you can see there that there's a side lever which cams the barrel section forward so you can tip it up, and there you can see a loading chamber which has a lip, and that lip will nicely cam into the mouth of the barrel and give a sufficient seal for any gases. Now it's metal to metal, so perhaps not the perfect seal, but sufficient to not distract the shooter or be of any danger. So that particular system was very, very interesting. Obviously, because the barrel tips up, it's of limited use for something at a full length, and this isn't even a full length, but a short rifle or a full length musket. So maybe the design could be worked on a bit further, and that's what they did. The design fell on two gentlemen, a gunsmith named Niels Gregersen and Captain Frederick Wilhelm Scheel, who pretty much gathered everything together. I think the core of the system you could more or less see as the Lubnitz breech sealing system. To that they added the tip-up idea of the hull. And the other thing they took from the Lubnitz, as you saw, is the unusual Underhammer system. Now, the Underhammer has been known for a while. It's got many advantages, particularly for target shooting. It places the ignition nicely in line with the barrel axis, so you don't get a sort of off-center force all of a sudden from either the percussion hammer or the flint. And also it means that the flash from ignition is nicely tucked away. So anybody who's fired a muzzleloader will know it's pretty distracting having a percussion flash or a pan flash right against your cheek. So everything's nice and tidy out the way. You've got a very nice, clear, unobstructed sight picture. So plenty of advantages there, but funnily enough, it was rarely used in military firearms. But they took that design and they actually changed it a bit. They kept the principle, but they made it a little more robust. If you see the Lubnitz video, you can see there's some fairly fragile springs in that enormous trigger guard, and I can very easily see that being accidentally tripped quite easily. So they make the whole system a little more enclosed and a little robust. So there we go. Basically, by 1842, the Norwegians are ready with the first trial patterns, and they get approved. And as I said, there are countless models that were adopted all the way past 1867, when the Norwegians transitioned slowly to the Remington rolling block. At that stage, they even adapted their Kammerladers to cartridge breech loading. There was one small bore 11mm version, and even a cartridge conversion of the big 18mm rimfire cartridge. So I think it proved its worth, and they're obviously a much loved system. So anyway, enough of Danes, Norwegians, back to the Swedes. Now, unfortunately, the precise design and procurement process for the Swedish version of the Kammerlader seems to be lost in time. And I've asked various Norwegian and Swedish collectors, and they don't seem to know much more than what I've gleaned myself off the scraps on the internet. So going by common sense and educated guesses here. One thing you have to realise is that Sweden at the time was unified with Norway under the same crown, but in particular the armed forces were distinct and separate, and equally was their armament. So they had no obligation to have the Norwegian Kammerlader if they didn't want to, and globally they didn't. They in fact went through the conventional evolution from flintlock to the conventional percussion lock, including the Navy, as early as 1833. But something must have happened. Perhaps the Swedish matelots were, fed up of sharing grog with the Norwegian matelots, who were waxing lyrical about their lovely short handy breech loading percussion carbines and short rifles, and seems to have caught the attention of the Admiralty up above, and probably in the late 1840s they started the ball rolling for a new firearm. Now, they didn't just go and buy a Norwegian one. The Norwegian naval pattern is quite nice, a little short handy thing, but obviously they wasn't good enough for them, and it fell to a naval officer, August von Feilitzen, to do a complete overhaul of the system. And this Feilitzen has a little special place in my heart because he came up with this. This is the most fantastic retro-futuristic steampunk pepper box that you will ever see. That was actually trialled during the first Swedish revolver trials, although apparently more as a courtesy than in all seriousness. So let's take a closer look. So this is a short rifle, so 1 meter 24 long, but still 4.7 kilos, so quite a heft. Up top I'll put a couple of pictures of a Norwegian infantry rifle I used to have, just to illustrate some of the differences between the two. Now, the most striking difference is to the lock. So the Norwegian one has a huge long mainspring that loops over the hammer, and the hammer's cocked with a little side tab. This has been streamlined so that nothing sticks out, which makes sense in a naval environment where you've got, firstly, your uniform still has all sorts of belts and loops all over the place, and you've got rigging. So the hammer once again is masked by this guard, and then you've got this lovely loop here so that should anything be rubbing this way or the other way, it's very unlikely that it's going to catch on anything. Now, this little leather tab here is not my own invention. It's actually mounted either across under the hammer to act as a safety, so you can't physically strike the percussion nipple, and it would also be used in dry fire. And Norwegians had a similar system. They had a leather-clad pin that could be stuck in a little loop built into the frame instead of having these brass studs, and called Klear, which is a click leather. Sounds like what it does. I've been informed that this was used during drills. It wasn't practice to put this thing on while loading, for example. That would be a waste of time. So, where has the mainspring gone? Well, in fact, this whole piece, trigger guard, trigger, and tang and all this is one modular unit, which I can show you. And by the way, it has a hooked breech, so you can just lever out the whole action, which is heavy. Wah! There we go. Now I've got the action, and then we can just ease out the trigger unit. Oh, I haven't unscrewed it enough. There we go. And there we go, that's the whole trigger unit. The lock, if you like. Now, because Underhammer is extremely simple, this is the mainspring. Please forgive this temporary replacement. Powers the hammer. And nested underneath there is a small blade spring just for the trigger return. So that was a nifty bit of design. So then if we quickly look at the receiver, at the stock, one of the immediate problems we can see is the extreme thinness of this receiver section. These normally appear with cracks in this part. This was no exception. I managed to repair them without any loss of strength, luckily. Interesting to note over the Norwegian is this brass plate instead of iron, I presume. And what they have here is a little ramp which is integral to the plate, and that's just to aid the rotation of the chamber up and down. And also there is a brass well, a brass liner, which I hope you can see there. So obviously this is to protect the whole area from burning when firing, and it does a good job. Now this screw here has two functions. It holds this guard portion, and it also aligns the chamber with the barrel, so that when you cam the chamber forward again, it's going to line up with the mouth of the barrel. On the Norwegian version, there's a crest that runs down the center of it to do the same thing. So moving on to the receiver section, you can see down underneath there, it's made of essentially two parts. We have a U-shaped first receiver section, which is screwed into the barrel and indexed with this screw here, and then we have a big block at the back, which is held in place by the 4 screws there. So it's a heavy piece. Right, so let's take this section out, and then we can see how it actually functions. Now, another difference over the Norwegian one is that this lever is held in place just with a little sliding catch here, whereas the Norwegian one has a big octagonal nut, which is very laborious to undo and get out. So this one, just pull a little catch, and out everything pops, he says. There we go. Now in here you notice a little protrusion. We'll see what that does in a second. So here we have an unavoidable little model. This will be the receiver. This little red square is representing the protrusion or stud here inside. Now, the chamber itself has a couple of features. This is essentially the same as a Norwegian pattern. We have an oval opening here, oblong channel, and then a 2-lobed opening on the other side. Something that isn't on the Norwegian is this channel here, which the function will be explained in a sec. And so let's put that in the receiver. Note I've also put the screw in the bottom, same as that one there, so that the chamber lines up correctly with the mouth of the barrel. Now, the lever has this rather strangely shaped axis pin. Now, what it has looks like a crankshaft and, well, camshaft really is what it actually is. We have a first centered normal cylindrical portion which is supported on one side of the receiver. Now we have an eccentric cam which is going to go through the through passage there, and then we have a little shoulder with a second cam section, and then this end portion which supports the other end in the receiver. So let's put that through in position. So what's going to happen is this is a system at rest. The lip here of the chamber is inside the opening of the barrel, rather more tightly fitting than I've managed to receive to the machine. So the first movement of the lever is going to cause the eccentric cam portion to rise inside the oblong opening, and that rising is going to make the chamber move backwards. You can see there. So that means the mouth, the rim of the powder chamber is no longer inside the barrel mouth. The shoulder portion has entered the first lobe of this sort of heart-shaped opening here, which means that any more rotation of the lever is going to cause the chamber to rotate as with it, which is exactly what happens like that. You can then now load at your ease. When you return the chamber back down to vertical. It's now lined up with the barrel mouth. And when you drop the lever further, now the elongated portion of the cam is pushing forward on inside this oblong opening and forces the chamber back into engagement with the barrel mouth. And the second lobe here allows for the forward movement. Same with the oval opening here at the back on this side. It just allows the cylindrical portion here to transition between the two. There we go. Simple as that. Now back to this little red stud. Actually, it's just a safety. If you can see here in the locked position, if I've drawn it correctly, the stud is between this squared off portion of the sidewall and this flat top. And when you open it, it lines up with the slot there to allow the chamber to rotate. So this is a safety to prevent any upward rotation. I suppose should for some reason be a massive gas spike here at the interface, or maybe the axis pin here, maybe there could be a crack or something. So just as a backup to ensure that it doesn't flip up. And yeah, this little feature is not on the Norwegian, so already Swedish attention to safety there. So while we're on the subject of safeties, there's one more which is actually common to all Kammerladers, and that is that there is a safety to prevent the lever from being tilted up inadvertently. So if you push it here or near the tip, it's not going to come up. What you've got to do is push up on this little button, and there's a latch when you do that, and you can see it just pushes the lever out of engagement with the pin there, and it works well. It's in a natural movement. When you're pulling up, you'll push the button up and then you're free. There's also another one for making sure it doesn't go in too far, and a third rest here so that you don't rotate it too far down either, so it's supported. Oh, clever little bit of design there. Anyway, let's go off to the range. Oh, but before I go, perhaps I should just show you what is hopefully going to help me hit the target. So we'll start here. We have a lovely deep 6-groove rifling, you can see there. And the front sight is actually a very nicely defined rectangular post, nice and sharp. Rear sight is not so good. We have two settings of unknown origins. There's no numbers on them. And no one seems to know what they are. The other people I know who have these say they shoot high, so we'll just have to see where it goes. And finally, we have a very nice raised cheek piece here, very nicely carved, and ergonomically it really is just perfect for the sights. So can't wait to get out there. So here we are with this peculiar beast here on the range. Now, for a projectile, I'm using a round ball. The original was a weird egg-shaped thing. No one knows exactly the dimensions nor the weight, but I do know there's a plane-based conical from Accurate Molds, which apparently is very good, so I'll probably get that in time. But in the meantime, I'm going to go to round ball. That's the advantage of muzzleloaders. For 50 meters, round ball works for everything. So you can quickly get shooting and later get specialized bullets if you need to. So I've got a .595 inch ball, which I tried in the Baker and it didn't like, so hopefully it'll like these. And for the powder charge, unfortunately I'm an idiot and I forgot my powder measure. So what I'm going to do is resort to an old trapper's trick or something, and which is basically cup your hand, put the ball that you're going to use in there, and you pour powder until it just covers the ball, and that gives you a good ballpark figure. And to store the charges, luckily someone before me here shot shotgun, and left these nice shells, so I'm using these to store my individual charges when I need them. And percussion caps, I'm using the usual 4 winged ones. I have to pinch them because the nipple is basically too fat for what you'd usually use for percussion revolvers and a little bit too thin for these top hat ones. So I just give them a pinch and they hold on sufficiently. So what I'll do is first pour the charge in, then put powder and patch. I'm not pouring it, I'm not loading it nud, I'm putting a patch on. Originally it was a paper cartridge, so it would have been patched effectively. I could probably also use a naked round ball, but well, these are nicely pre-greased and hopefully it'll keep the ball a bit cleaner. So here we go. It does make your fingers greasy though. Now what I have done underneath, forgot to mention, is I have the leather hammer stop there. So what I'll do, because it's convenient to reach the nipple here, is load powder and ball, put the percussion cap on and then close it. Then I'll remove the leather and shoot. You can't really load it with the hammer down like you would say on a rifle or pistol with no cap there, because obviously when you bring the chamber down you have the danger of striking with enough force to set off. So that's why they had this hammer stop. I'm guessing they probably pulled it to full cock because there is no half cock, and did this. It makes sense. So here we go. So it is extremely convenient having this chamber just there. And then I'm just using a short starter, as you would do on a muzzle loader. Get it nice and tight up on the powder. And then I get my cap. Give it a pinch. Now normally with a normal cap you would then put it forward. Here it's stopping because of the wings of the cap. Then just give it a push down. Cocked and locked. Now I'll just remove the leather piece, just put it to the side for now, and we're ready to go. Whoo, whoo. Smoking like a steam train. Now because the chamber's slightly conical, it's actually, you can just thumb it in, because the front of the chamber here is being lubed every time by the patches, so you can put it down almost to the powder. And I'm just doing this just as a little check, so it sits nicely. So this is my last shot, 12th I think. There's more holes on there because some of my other patches have fallen off. I'm having to aim almost 2 foot below the middle, so yeah, it's not too convenient, but you'll see it's still not too bad. So here goes. Oh, and by the way, loading is just as easy as it was before. Also closing, and I don't notice any sealing problems. There's only a tiny bit of smut there on the where the gas seal is, hardly anything, so it's still doing its job. Yeah, it just Grips forward. Leather away, and I'll do this one freestanding just for giggles. Move me mic. There we go. And I'm spent. Let's go and see. So there we go. The top one was the first shot, and so I immediately corrected and started aiming down there. And the rest are quite nice. Now somewhere in there, one of those is a Baker ball. Same caliber, unfortunately, so can't tell which one. And interestingly, the last two went up there with the same aim, one sitting, one standing. So it could be that finally grime was starting to take effect on accuracy. But well, for a close range naval weapon, for naval engagements, ship to ship, and that kind of intended action, it's perfectly fine. And the reloading is really convenient. So there you have it. Works just fine. Probably even better once I get the flat base conical for it. Anyway, all this lovely redesign and optimization ultimately came to nothing because in 1855 the Swedes scrapped this and went back to a conventional percussion short rifle. Now the reasons behind this we can speculate. No doubt the thin stock here around the action had something to do with it. Also, when I disassembled this after that shooting session, even though there's no fouling here above, all the underside it goes everywhere. There was black powder gunge underneath, between the various plates of the brass shielding. Basically, you need to take this apart completely to give it a good clean, which you have to for a black powder firearm, even more in a naval environment. So there we go. Ultimately, it was unsuccessful. There's even some speculation as to whether this made it past the trials, because there's no real record of them being used in regular service. We know they're adopted, at least, because there is, on this one and many others, a little X in a circle, which is the Navy sold out of service stamp, the Flottans Kassationsstempel. So at least it got procured by the Navy for it to be then sold out of service. And in fact, the fact that it was sold out of service means that of all the Kammerladers, this is probably the most accessible. The Norwegians ones, they were used to the last minute, so they're the ones that were in service got very well used and worn out probably, and the others tend to stay in Norway, where there's a good market for them, and they're still used in competition shooting and such. So yeah, these were all sold away and then made their way over various surplus markets. So there we go. All in all, records seem to indicate that about 1,500 of these were produced. Some apparently in Belgium, if I'm correct, and some in Sweden, although we don't exactly know where. We can speculate it's Husqvarna, but we're not sure. Now, was that the end of the Swedish adventure? Not quite. See, 10 years later, an inventor named Hagström proposed a conversion of the then service rifle, the 1860 Vrede, to Kammerlader. Obviously, this was rejected. The cartridge loading breech loaders were just around the corner, so they were not going to bother going forward with that kind of conversion. However, it's interesting to note that Hagström also developed a needle fire rifle, and it's often quoted in the literature that the furniture stock of the needle rifles were used in the very first Swedish rolling blocks, the model 1867 That's, however, not true. They used the furniture from the Kammerlader conversion instead. There we go. Another BOTR myth-busting tidbit. So, we are here at the end. Thank you very much for your attention. This has gone way longer than I expected. So, thank you for your patience. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your comments on Facebook. And I shall see you again next time. Bye.